Welcome to Alaska Weather, a production of Alaska Public Media and the National Weather Service, Alaska Region. Produced and broadcast daily from the studios of KAKM, Alaska Weather provides complete forecasts, public, marine, and aviation for all of Alaska. Alaska Weather is made possible by the following sponsors.
Alyeska Pipeline Service Company, fueling philanthropic programs and dedicated to creating educational and professional opportunities for Alaska Native people.
The National Weather Service.
Good evening, everyone. I'm meteorologist Dave Snider with the National Weather Service. It's the 28th of February, and as always, we encourage you to stay up to date with your local weather information from the National Weather Service. You can find that at weather.gov/Alaska, weather.gov/Anchorage, weather.gov/Juneau, or /Fairbanks there. And if you're looking for aviation weather, just change the name to AAWU. That's Alaska Aviation Weather Unit, of course. You can give us a call on the weather information line at 800-472-0391 and send us an email if you can't find what you need. We'll help you get you pointed in the right direction so you can save that for the future. Now, starting tomorrow, if for some reason you load up that web page and it doesn't work like it normally does, make sure you're typing in weather.gov/ and then the name. If you've got something that reads PAFG or PAFC, some of the old web pages and the addresses we've been using for a long time, those aren't going to work after tomorrow. We've been trying to push people toward those new website names for a while. Tomorrow's that magic day where they're not going to work any longer. So if you have some trouble, that's what's going on. Here's a look at the snowfall forecast, and up and down southeast, it looks like it's going to be wintertime again. Significant snow is still moving through the region, and it will probably continue at least until Thursday night and into Friday. Here's the total snow forecast through Friday night. And focus on the red areas here. A lot of this is higher terrain, but there will be some hot spots there around the Juneau and Admiralty Island area, also across the outer coast and the central panhandle from Sitka and up and down the coast there. Also into the Misty Fjords. We're looking at some lighter snowfall areas, but not the big significant stuff that you're going to see across the central and northern sections of the panhandle. As you would imagine, for places like Elfin Cove and Glacier Bay and Pelican, including Juneau, winter weather advisories and winter storm warnings are posted right now, and they will continue until Friday, so plan on more snow. There may be a little bit of a lull through the evening, and then it's going to pick up again later tonight and into your Thursday. It looks like that will continue, probably even into Friday in some cases too. So you'll see the weather charts in a minute. As you'll notice, this is still an evolving storm system, so there's still a little bit of setup that's occurring out here across the outer coast as these weather systems come in, stall, and then bring up additional moisture from the south. This may change a little bit, but the bottom line is it is going to snow through a significant part of southeast in the next 24 to 48 hours. And most of you watching tonight in southeast are under some type of winter weather alert for snow, whether that's a little bit, 3 to 6 inches, and in some cases you're probably talking about 6 to 10 inches, and those places would be out around Juneau and again the Admiralty Island area, as well as Hoonah, probably Elfin Cove, and again Pelican, looking at some of the greater snow amounts forecast for the southeast. Here's a look at the map there. The warning's plotted there in red, so a significant part of southeast under that warning status right now. As you get up toward the Misty Fjords, you're under a winter weather advisory. You're used to a little more snow in that higher terrain, and you can see hit and miss across some of the inner channels there, also looking at winter weather advisory. So look a little bit further north, that's for wind. The eastern Alaska range expecting some gusty weather conditions over the next several days, a winter weather advisory there, or a wind chill advisory I should say. And then northward, the Brooks range, you're looking at snow and blowing snow due to some stronger winds across the region. Not looking at any additional accumulation, but looking at some poor visibility and some stronger gusts. Blizzard warning for the eastern Beaufort Seacoast. That will continue through tonight and really all the way, looks like, through Thursday and Friday, thanks to those strong winds coming in from the west. 60-mile-an-hour winds there and wind chills down to 55 below for the eastern Beaufort Seacoast. For the areas east of Dead Horse and Prudhoe Bay, a winter weather advisory there. Again, for poor visibility and gusty winds, not looking for any additional snow in that region. Here's a look at the stronger wind gusts that'll take us all the way through Friday. You can see that really the winds pick up here. Here's the green shades all the way up to the orange shades. And if we go over here to the chart, that correlates to about 30 miles per hour all the way up to about 60 miles per hour. So here's the strongest winds. That's where the blizzard warning is in effect now for Kaktovik and the eastern Beaufort Seacoast. But east of Prudhoe Bay and Dead Horse, the winds are still strong enough to move that snow around and create some pretty nasty wind chills, so be careful there. But you also notice those stronger winds extend up into the ridge line of the Brooks Range through Arctic Village and then just north of Bettles, especially the south slopes there. So we're going to see some stronger winds around the Brooks Range, but also around the central and eastern Beaufort Seacoast. So plan on winds. Even though it may not be snowing a lot, the winds are going to have a big impact in the weather for a large part of the North Slope and certainly some of the higher terrain there across the Alaska Range and the eastern Alaska Range as we go into the next 24 hours. Here's a look at the weather picture, and you can see low pressure across the eastern Gulf here. Notice how it's not moving very much. It's really just kind of sitting there across the north and eastern Gulf, and as it does so, it's also pulling in moisture slowly from the south and eastern parts of the Gulf as well as the Pacific Northwest. The overall weather picture has a fairly pronounced trough sitting right here across the eastern 2/3 of Alaska with a ridge building out across the west. The result of that is this weather pattern just isn't moving very much, and it's going to focus its attention on southeast, at least for snowfall. The other side of the coin, though, is that colder, drier air is rushing southward, and that's also helping to expand the ice once more across the Bering Sea. It has been retreating a little bit in the last week or so thanks to warming weather there, but now it looks like for the next 5-6 days or so, at least that ice edge will be working its way southward at this point. Don't think it's going to make it to St. Paul this season. Here's a look at the loop one more time, and that low pressure system again here is really going to be key because it is bringing in another wave of low pressure from the south. Let's see if you can find it on the maps with me here in a minute. In the meantime, strong pressure gradient across the central and eastern Beaufort Seacoast, creating the blizzard conditions we're seeing up around the North Slope. South of that, though, really dry. You'll notice a lot of white here around the Alaska Range. That's not cloud cover. That's actually snow on the ground seen by the visible satellite picture, and that's what you're seeing as you move out here across the central and eastern Gulf. Those high speckled clouds there indicating some pretty chilly air. This is cloud cover. This is snow. And west of that, we get back into that very dry weather regime. Now, some of this moisture working up across the Alaska Peninsula has been creating some snow showers, also some significant icing reports there along places like Port Heiden, I believe, today. Meanwhile, a little bit further north, the center of high pressure and big cold at 1,000, almost 50 millibars. Close, but not quite, right over the Gulf of Anadyr, and that is helping to draw that colder air further and further south. The return of that is that southerly moving air across the west coast. We're going to see that really hover out in the west with rain and snow showers along that stationary boundary with high pressure sitting right across the Gulf of Anadyr, feeding into the back side of this weather system. Now, for most of in the Cook Inlet, that will be dry, cold, breezy conditions there, and maybe even windy conditions at times, especially through some of the passes. Winter weather advisory is posted for the Thompson Pass area, at least until 6 o'clock earlier today. And across some of the higher terrain in the Copper River Basin, there may be some snow and blowing snow there. That snow falling should be fairly quick to pass. The winds will not be. The winds and the snow will be an issue for southeast. The strongest winds look to be the northerlies coming out of the Lynn Canal. Some of those could reach well over storm force as we get into tonight and into tomorrow. The winds will be coming up there, and periods of heavy snow will continue across the Panhandle. Look how this low pressure system just barely moves as we get into Wednesday. It retrogrades or moves westward just a little bit at 1,000 millibars, but remember there's that second piece. There's the moisture and the warmth moving northward, and as that continues to work its way toward the Clarence Strait and the Dixon entrance there, you'll probably see that rain and snow start to sneak in a little bit more across some of the southern entrances. But the focus for accumulating snow is going to continue across the bulk of southeast, including Juneau. Folks, if you don't have your shovel and know where it is, this is going to be the time to find it because it looks like some of that's going to be heavy. And at least right now, forecasts that are taking us into Wednesday night and Thursday in some cases are pushing a foot already. So again, if this doesn't move or the focus changes a little bit more, there potentially could be even more in some of those locations there. Right now, again, we're talking about 6 to 10 inches of snow around Juneau, Admiralty Island, Pelican, Glacier Bay, and Hoonah picking up some of the higher amounts as we saw earlier today. Now on the back side of this again is just it's wind. You can see the tight pressure gradient across Prince William Sound, the Chugach, the Cook Inlet region, all the way down towards Shelikof Strait, and even the Alaska Peninsula, and most of the Alaska Range itself is under the influence of this weather maker, but it's not going to be a precipitation producer on the north side. It is simply going to be moving that air around in significant fashion, feeding it from this big pile here of high pressure and trying to move it as quickly as possible out into the Gulf. So a lot of cold and dry air on the move. Up north, though, you can also see that tight pressure gradient across the central and eastern Beaufort seacoast. And that means that snow that's on the ground will be moving through. There might be a little opportunity for some passing snow showers or fog and snow as we get into Thursday there. But once again, here's Thursday, and that low pressure system across the eastern Gulf didn't move. In fact, it absorbed that wave moving up across the eastern and the Pacific Northwest and the eastern Gulf, brought in that warm air, and reinvigorated the weather maker here sitting off the coast of southeast. So it's going to snow on Thursday as well. High pressure across the Bering Sea at 1,042 millibars is still kind of holding this next one back. But you can see there is a weather maker trying to make its way into the western chain at 1,005 millibars. So a lot going on either ends, a lot of cold, dry air in the middle, and a lot of air moving around the state in vigorous fashion that you're probably going to notice it no matter where you are in the 49th state as we go through the next 2 to 3 days. Let's talk temperatures. 30s today for most of southeast, hovering around freezing in the capital city, 38 in Sitka. Low to mid 30s for southern parts of the Panhandle, 27 in Hyder. 30 around Cordova, 27 for Valdez, 24 in Anchorage today. It was 27 around Homer. Gocana hit 16, 1 in Eagle, 9 in Fairbanks and the Golden Heart City, 9 in Fort Yukon. Northward we go, and 20 below in Prudhoe Bay and Dead Horse, 12 below for Kaktovik, 8 below in Barrow. As you move down toward Wainwright, we see temperatures up and down there from anywhere from 8 below to 22 below. 1 below in Kivalina, 14 above in Kotzebue. It was 2 below in Shishmaref, 1 above in Nome. Galena had 8. Looks like Sparavon and Russian Mission were all around 10 degrees. McGrath about the same. Bethel today, 3. Dillingham and King Salmon were in the lower teens. Lake Iliamna around 10, 23 in Kodiak. Teens and 20s for the Alaska Peninsula, 20 in St. Paul, just a little milder in St. George today, 32 in Dutch Harbor and Unalaska. Atka was 41, the rest of the chain in the 30s. Overnight lows will stay well below 0 for Southwest, anywhere from 5 above to 5 below for most around Bristol Bay. Teens and 20s for the chain, 30s as you head out a little bit further west into the central chain. It could be as cold as 3 below in Anchorage tonight, 18 above in Kodiak, 20s and 30s for southeast. The interior, well below 0, 25 to 30 below in most cases, all the way up to the North Slope. Prudhoe Bay and Dead Horse, some of the coldest weather there, but remember the wind chills. That's where the rubber meets the road, or the ice road, I guess. 50 to 55 below for some up north. High temperatures tomorrow, 10 to 20 below for the eastern and central Beaufort Seacoast. The middle Tanana Valley around Fairbanks, 1 below, 6 above in Nome. Single digits to low teens for Bristol Bay. Teens and 20s for the Alaska Peninsula and 30s for the chain. 25 in St. Paul and about the same there for Kodiak Island tomorrow. 20s and 30s for southeast, the capital holding close to freezing, maybe going slightly above. On to flying weather, you're going to see MVFR and IFR throughout the day across southeast. Watch for significant changes up and down throughout the day. VFR for most of the mainland and IFR way out west in the morning, and you'll see very little change in that during the day. Watch for IFR to sneak eastward across the North Slope, and again, watch for changes across southeast as we go. Here's your pass conditions. As you would expect, Anaktuvik and Adigan Pass expected to be VFR through really most of the day. Lake Clark and Merrill Pass should see similar conditions. Good and clear sailing for Windy Pass and Rainy Pass. Isabel Pass looks to be VFR throughout the day. Mentasta Pass, we expect to see marginal conditions there. Tanita Pass, VFR, and Portage Pass looks okay. Chilkoot and White Pass expect MVFR to IFR to start, and then maybe some improvements by the afternoon. Remember though, it's a north wind and it is going to be a strong one coming out of the passes. Freezing levels show that freezing line at the surface starting to work its way southward. We've got some warm air here, but the cold air is going to win this weather pattern. Icing potential certainly going to be moving and changing over the next couple days along this boundary, but it will pretty much hover over southeast in the northern Gulf, at least above 3,000 feet. There could be some occasional moderate in there. We got some higher isolated reports today across the Alaska Peninsula. And then out west along the boundary above 8,000 feet, there's a lot of warmer air out to our west. Most of this, though, will be light to isolated moderate. Here's the jet stream, and low pressure across the northern Gulf is pretty much stuck right here across the northern Gulf, anywhere from 65 to 95 knots on the south side of that, and then a strong push from the ocean right over southeastern Alaska. Cold northerly winds, though, wrapping into the west side of this, 90 to 100 knots coming down through western Alaska. Again, that's all thanks to that very slow-moving tandem of weather systems, low pressure here in the Gulf and high pressure across the Bering Sea. Here's a look at 9,000 feet now. Low pressure right underneath our main weather driver across the Gulf. You'll see very little change here in the next couple charts. South and southwesterlies moving in about 20 to 40 knots. Northerlies coming down the west coast at 35 to 50 knots. Some of that affecting the low-level wind shear and probably some chop across a large part of the Alaska Peninsula. Up north, more of a north and westerly flow. It's significantly faster, of course, at the surface for the central and eastern Beaufort Seacoast. And then across the central and western chain, 20 to 40 knots or so moving across the southern Bering Sea. At 3,000 feet, the map doesn't really look a whole lot different. So when we have a weather system that looks the same up top, looks the same in the middle, looks kind of the same at the bottom, things aren't really moving very much. And in this case, they kind of feed off of each other. We get that strong southerly wind moving in here at 10 to 20 knots, 50 knots a little bit further south. So this is where that warm air is coming from. And then across the northern Gulf, 20 to as strong as 50 knots wrapping into the north and western side. And then winds coming right over the Bering Strait, out of the Chukchi Sea and through Bristol Bay and the southern Bering. That's cold stuff, and 25 to 40 knots will do it over the Seward Peninsula and the Western Cape. South and easterly winds across the central and western chain, 25 to 40 there. High pressure just south of the Gulf of Anadyr. So here's your turbulence chart tomorrow. There's probably going to be some isolated severe reports across some of our suspect places like the northern Gulf and our gaps and bays and passes here across southeast as that weather maker is moving through. And probably some of our gaps across the Alaska Range and maybe even up north. We've got a significant northerly wind. We've got a very tight pressure gradient here, so hold on to the yoke there and be extra careful. Be ready for some thumps and bumps. Occasional moderate there across the Alaska Range all the way out toward Bristol Bay and the Alaska Peninsula. And for central and northern parts of southeast, not only will visibility be difficult for you tomorrow, but the turbulence is probably going to become an increasing issue as the day goes on and could linger into Thursday and maybe even Friday before that eases up. That's a look at your aviation forecast. We'll be back with the rest of your marine weather here in just a few minutes. Stay tuned.
Hello everyone, I'm Steele McGonigal.
And I'm Kara O'Brien. Welcome to this edition of Destination Tomorrow.
On this episode, we'll be focusing on how radiation will affect our efforts to reach destinations like the Moon and Mars.
In recent years, NASA researchers have been striving to meet the goal of sending astronaut crews to the Moon, Mars, and beyond. Although there are numerous technological and logistical hurdles to get over, one of the most daunting challenges facing us will be protecting astronauts from harmful radiation. Here on Earth and in low Earth orbit, radiation risks are somewhat mitigated due to the protection provided by our thick atmosphere and our magnetosphere. But outside the protection of Earth, the radiation in space could prove deadly if humans are not properly protected.
Even though radiation studies have been going on for years, new questions are being asked in preparation for extended stays in space. Some of the key questions NASA researchers must address include, how can we assure survival and health of humans traveling far from Earth? What technology must we create to enable explorers to go beyond where we've been? And what new opportunities can research bring to enrich the lives of everyone back here on Earth?
To help answer these questions, we'll travel to some of the facilities that are allowing us to better understand radiation and the dangers astronauts may face. Up first, correspondent Tonya St. Romain spoke with Mark Weiland of the Space Radiation Analysis Group at NASA Johnson Space Center. This group is working hard to monitor and protect our crews from this dangerous radiation. Here's Tonya to explain.
Living and working outside of Earth's atmosphere is a very dangerous proposition. Extreme temperatures, lack of oxygen, and hosts of other risks make space a very hostile environment for humans. But one of the least talked about and most dangerous risks associated with spaceflight is radiation exposure. When astronauts travel outside of Earth's atmosphere, they're routinely exposed to much higher levels of radiation than are typically encountered back here on Earth. For this reason, the Space Radiation Analysis Group, or SRAG, is working to develop tools that will monitor radiation events caused by the sun and other radiation-producing sources. These tools will be used to help us better understand how to keep our crews safe from radiation exposure when traveling outside the Earth's atmosphere. I spoke with Mark Weiland at NASA Johnson Space Center to find out more.
Our team here at SRAG is a great group of people who's charged with keeping the radiation as low as possible to the astronauts. And we do this with monitoring, with shielding analyses of new vehicles, and with real-time support and mission control.
How is radiation measured in space?
We have to use different kinds of monitoring techniques than you use on the ground. If you work in a hospital or a nuclear power plant, they have radiation instrumentation which measures very different types of radiation than we're concerned about in space. So the instruments we use are very different. We also have monitors on unmanned vehicles. The GOES spacecraft, which watches weather on Earth, also has radiation instruments on it that we use. And there's other instruments that are closer to the sun that we look at. We have to measure this radiation because it's very damaging biologically to the crew. We know this from research that shows space radiation can be more harmful to people than radiation here on Earth. And it's also a legal requirement. Astronauts are classified as radiation workers, and so we have to monitor their exposures. We also, by doing this, we know when they approach administrative limits and legal limits, and so that we can take action to prevent them from getting there.
Where does radiation in space come from?
Actually, it comes in 3 different places when we're in low Earth orbit, like on Space Shuttle or Space Station. We have radiation from our trapped radiation belts, the Van Allen belts. We have radiation that comes from outside our solar system called galactic cosmic radiation. We also have radiation that comes from the sun during big solar particle events. Now, the sun has an 11-year cycle that goes from very minimum amounts of activity to very maximum amounts of activity. And during the maximum amounts of activity, we have lots of solar particle events and solar flares, and we can get radiation from those events. Now, when we're going back to the moon and we're outside of the Earth's protected belts, it's going to be much more dangerous for the crews. We can cause acute effects. The crew can get sick very rapidly, unlike they can on Space Station or Space Shuttle.
Here's a look at your sea ice edge, and as we were talking about earlier, the edge has been eroding to the north thanks to the warmer conditions and the southerly winds we've seen across the Bering Sea. However, now with the northerly winds that we just saw in a lot of those aviation charts, it's no surprise that the edge will be working its way southward again. However, our sea ice analysts tell us that they don't expect it to reach St. Paul at this point in the season now. I look toward Cook Inlet, and you can see that there is still some thicker ice, higher concentration ice across the northern part of the inlet, I should say, and that continues to thin out a little bit south of Calgan Island, but it's certainly still there and will probably grow as well as we go through the rest of the week. Southeast, you're looking at some strong winds on top of your snow as we go through Wednesday and Thursday. Notice northerlies in the Lynn Canal up to 45 knots already, and there will be a threat for some freezing spray across the region, so keep watch on that. Southeasterlies 25 to 35 from Petersburg all the way down to Ketchikan and Metlakatla, 5 to 7 foot seas there, and the offshore winds north of Sitka and out of Cross Sound will be significant as well. 40 to 45 knots on Wednesday with 10 to 13 foot seas. A stronger onshore flow from the south and west, south of Sitka, 25 to 30 with 15 foot seas there on Wednesday, coming up to 50 to 55 knots across the central outer coast, 16 to 18 foot seas at their highest. Notice again that low pressure is going to be sitting right about here, it looks like, for Thursday. Northerlies in the Lynn Canal up to 60 knots with 12 foot seas there and 5 to 9 foot seas in the Clarence Strait. So significant wind and significant snowfall possible for many throughout the next several days in southeast. Stay up to date on your weather. For south central, northerlies in Prince William Sound, northeasterlies on the outside, 30 knots with a 9 foot sea. The winds coming around the western Gulf, 30 to 35, 8 to as high as 12 foot seas east of Kodiak Island. Northeasterlies coming down Cook Inlet, pick up to about 30 knots as you get west of the Barrens. 30 knots there with an 11 foot sea. Becomes northerlies at 35 as you move east of the Barren Islands. There's a 10 foot sea there. For Thursday, northwesterlies pick up even more east of the Barrens to 40 knots with a 12 foot sea. Northwesterlies in Shelikof Strait to 30 knots, 10 to 20 knots down Cook Inlet, and northerlies coming through Prince William Sound and across the northern Gulf at 25 with a 7 foot sea. Some of those winds out of the passes and Copper River Basin may be a little bit on the strong and gusty side as you would expect with this pattern. Northerlies over some of the open water in Bristol Bay, 30 knots with a 6-foot sea. That may ice up a little bit more as we go through the week. Otherwise, 30 to 35 all the way up and down the coast. 9-foot seas in the Pacific coast and 11-foot seas for the Bering Sea coast. For Thursday, a northwesterly shift. Freezing spray once again could be an issue in several places. 7 to 9-foot seas on the Bering Sea coast and 10 to 14-foot seas there across the Pacific coast with winds up to 45 knots from Castle Cape to Chignik on your Thursday. For the Aleutians, north and easterly winds will be in charge really the rest of the week. Looks like 25 to 35 for the central and eastern chains, 7 to 17-foot seas for the Pacific, and 9 to 12-foot seas for the Bering Sea coast. 17 to 20-foot seas expected for the western chain, 30 to 40 knots there for Wednesday. And as we get into Thursday, that diminishes just a little bit. 10 to 15-foot seas expected with a northerly shift for Unalaska and Nikolsky, 15 to 25. Otherwise, we'll keep the easterlies going for the central chain, with seas ranging from 7 feet in the north to about 15 feet across the Pacific coast there south of Adak and Atka. For the west coast, northerlies are still in charge. Remember, they're pushing that ice edge southward, so we've got 15, 20, even 35-knot winds coming down the west coast. 20-knot winds from the north and east over St. Matthew. 4-foot seas there. Freezing spray just south of the ice edge, as you know. For St. Paul and St. George, northeasterlies at 20 knots with a 6-foot sea. By Thursday, that becomes northerly at 20 knots. Northwesterlies north of Nunivak Island, 25 there. 30 knots south of Macoriac with freezing spray near the ice edge. Northwesterlies over St. Matthew and 4-foot seas there in open waters. For the North Slope, the strongest winds will be across the central and eastern Beaufort seacoast, and wind chill factors again along the coast will be significant, down to 55 below or so in the next couple of days. South and westerly flow coming up the Chukchi coast, 10 to 15. As you get into Thursday, that shifts to more of a northwesterly wind at 15. Westerlies continue across the North Slope all the way through Prudhoe Bay, Dead Horse, and Kaktovik at 20 to as high as 35 knots for Thursday. Recapping tonight's weather, a slow-moving storm, if that, will hover across the eastern Gulf, unloading snow for parts of the Panhandle. Winter weather advisories and winter storm warnings are posted, including the capital city, and all the way up and down the coast for many locations. On top of that, it is going to be windy. So there may be some weather interruptions there, whether you're a mariner or an aviator. Stay up to date on your weather in southeast. Windy conditions and cold conditions for south central and really most of southwest. The interior looks to be high and dry, and gusty conditions with blizzards across the eastern Beaufort seacoast. Thanks for watching Alaska Weather.
These forecasts are to be used for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating. Alaska Weather is made possible by the following sponsors.
The National Weather Service.